You know, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that. You know, I think a lot of people don't know that part of your, I guess, political activities is actually being a women's rights advocate.
Yeah, and when it's about women's rights, it cannot be about biological males' rights who think they are women. There is a conflict of interest. It will not work. Just look at this sports. Women are being deprived of their achievements they have worked so hard for. But there is just no way that a woman could possibly be up to taking up men in any competition, for that matter. So it's like, what are we even doing here? They mess up our language. They're coming up with these new words because whatever language you have, a generic masculinum, you know, they claim it is suppressing women, and they're not seen, and they're invisible. Interesting note on that is actually take the Turkish language, for instance. The Turkish language doesn't know gender. It just has the same word, so they don't have that problem actually. Yeah, it's a highly equal society, isn't it? Yeah, well, I think not. So it has nothing to do with the language, but they're screwing up our language and to make women more visible. But at the same time, they are not even capable of answer a simple question anymore. What is a woman, right? So they are not capable of keeping women or honoring women's safe spaces. And now it's about men, biological men, you know, have to be allowed in all kinds of women's spaces. This is destroying actually all the achievements that women fought so hard for, like for decades. It's just erasing women. And I remember, what, 2-3 years ago maybe, a huge article in the New York Times on menstrual hygiene products. And in the entire article, they never once mentioned the word woman, women, girls, none of that. They referred to them as menstruators. I was so appalled by that. And I'm like, seriously, menstruators? That's what we call women now? Because, I don't know, 0.2% of the population might be offended? No. It's equal opportunity for women, not equal outcome. That's a whole other issue. Equal opportunity for women. And yes, I'm absolutely all for that. What I don't want, however, is like women's quotas. Because that is actually benevolent sexism. What they're saying by doing so is actually women are too stupid to get anywhere. So the state needs to, like, you know, facilitate it and, you know, make laws so they're being advanced.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's actually telling me I'm too stupid to get anywhere without the state's help. No thanks, but no thanks.
I'm sure you're aware that the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action here in the U.S. I know not too long ago. This has been a big issue playing out. You know, something that you mentioned, this menstruators.
Yeah.
We were talking about dehumanization a bit earlier in the interview, and that word strikes me as profoundly dehumanizing, actually.
Yes.
Under the guise of being humanizing.
What it actually does too, it reduces women to bodily functions.
Right.
You know? So in another terms, it's cervix havers. Seriously? It's stealing our identity. They're, you know, they're not even stopping at that anymore. They're stealing our sexual identity, what makes us who we are, the core of who we are.
You've said they a number of times throughout the interview. Who are they?
When you look in every single Western democracies, you have pretty much the same agendas being pushed. The elected governments, they all seem to be reading from the same script. Sometimes even down to the same wording. Build back better, safe and effective. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Stay home, and, you know, the whole shebang. And when I say they, I don't necessarily mean the elected governments, because I consider them just to be puppets of whoever is putting forward these agendas. I don't know who they actually are, but that's not the point, and I don't really care, because the only way that I can change anything is by going after the elected officials. That's where I have the contract with. I elected these people. They are responsible. They're accountable to me. But I don't know who's above that and whoever it is. So I need to understand and I need to know, why does my government, who was democratically elected, why do they do that? What's in it for them? You know, that's the thing. That's what I'm interested in.
No, that's a very interesting perspective, because there's all sorts of characters. You know, we hear World Economic Forum, you hear, you know, Bilderberg Group, you hear Club of Rome, you hear all sorts of things about people have theories. But you're saying, in a way, it doesn't actually matter that much, because it's the elected officials that you're going to be targeting.
Exactly. There is no constitution in the world that would grant me the right to take down the WEF. I have no connection to the WEF whatsoever. It is my government. Or is my government who is allowing the WHO to take, you know, overseas the governing powers. They need to fix this.
Well, of course, the UN is one of these groups that people point to, and Agenda 2030. Do you view the UN as an entirely unaccountable body?
Well, who are they exactly accountable to? I mean, could the German people, for instance, sue the UN? So it's actually what the German government is allowing the UN, whatever, you know, goals or whatever measures the UN proposes. It is still the governments that have to actually come up with the legislation part of that and put it into a law. So the UN does not have governing powers. But they are kind of trying to fix that now, you know, at least when it comes to the WHO, the international health regulations, for instance, they want to change that. And they kind of have to change it. And I'll tell you why. Because what they also figured out during COVID is they would have loved to impose much stricter restrictions on everyone, but they couldn't. Because we are democracies, and our elected officials will be up for re-election. And if they violate fundamental rights, if they infringe upon them, if they, you know, impose lockdowns on people, then the elected officials might not get re-elected. So what they're doing is, with the change of the international health regulations, which would then grant the WHO these governing powers in case of pandemic, which, by the way, they are the authority to call out a pandemic and then seize the governing powers. What is happening here is actually providing plausible deniability to the elected officials, because they can say now, we would have never done that. We would not infringe upon your rights. We would not take it away from you. It's the WHO doing it, right? So that's how this is working here. And yeah, in a way, it's also working like that with the EU institutions. The governments in the member states, they kind of tell their people, well, we wouldn't do this to you. We would not come up with this legislation that, you know, infringes upon your rights and takes away your freedom. It's the EU doing it.
Well, there's a theme of, let's say, avoidance of responsibility. I think that, you know, one of the criticisms, for example, of the U.S. Congress is that they have ceded a lot of their effectively legislative ability or requirement to legislate to unaccountable institutions, i.e., you know, what you would call the administrative state, different agencies, experts, right? And there's certain legal doctrines, one's called Chevron deference, that allow for that to happen. Everyone says, plus it wasn't me, right? And then in the end, as things get really bad, who's to blame?
Yeah, exactly. It's about removing the democratic process further and further away from the people. So the people will no longer be clear on who actually took what decision, you know, who can we hold accountable. And even if they knew, then they are kind of now getting to a stage where it would be impossible for the people to hold them accountable, because they never elected the person that took that decision. So that's been happening under the guise of, you know, doing something good, something for the greater good. they're really pretty much taking away freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. So like this whole climate madness, we need to save the planet now. What they're doing in the Netherlands, they're seizing the land. The farmers are no longer allowed to grow crops on their land. They have to relocate. Like, yeah, you just pack up a farm like you would a 2-bedroom apartment, right? No, it's not working that way. In Ireland, you know, the farmers, they have to like slaughter 50% of their cattle because they found out cows, you know, fart and burp, and this is now all killing us. They are actually taking away everything that we held dear and everything that made us into who we are, whether it's our cultural identity, national identity, sexual identity. We already talked about that. It's democratic principles. I think what they're trying to achieve is pretty much to transform our free and liberal societies that are made up of free individuals into this malleable, mindless mass where, you know, we can just be shoveled around wherever they, and once again, I say they, need us to be, to pretty much serve in their best interests, you know. So let's say taking away the food from us. Yeah, they want us to eat bugs, right? But they're going to still have their steaks. This framing going on, this gaslighting in the media, the citizens are being lectured to rather than the citizens forming an opinion and the government will actually have to implement what the people want. It's been turned the other way around. Yeah, it has nothing to do with democracy, none whatsoever.
And we have some interesting developments in terms of politicians being elected who have a very different view, like Geert Wilders, for example, like that. So what do you make of that?
Well, yeah, we're seeing that pretty much in all of the member states in Europe. Because the policies the EU has been pushing for decades, actually now, goes against the people's interests. So you see, like the what would consider our side, like the people's side, grow stronger. And Geert Wilders winning the elections in the Netherlands, that's phenomenal. And he has actually been around for quite some time. And they did just about everything they could to defame him, to stigmatize him. You know, they called him any name in the book. And here we are, right? He won the elections. And you see that in other countries too. So even in the Western European states, it's kind of, you know, starting.
I keep thinking about this far-right moniker because today, you know, another newly elected president in this case, Javier Milei, they called him far-right. A lot of us, I think, kind of believed this. But today, you kind of look at what's being called far-right, and it's comical how it's being used.
Yes.
Elon Musk is far-right.
Everyone that is not in support of whatever globalist agenda is being advocated for or pushed at the moment is given the label far-right or, you know, whatever. So the last 3 years, the very first big protest that happened against the restrictions because of COVID happened in Berlin, and it was August 20th of 2020. And the vast majority of protesters participating in that protest were actually left and green leaning, if not left or green. And they had a good time, protested, and they met, you know, a lot of people, as you do. And once they came home, to their astonishment, their TV told them that they were Nazis and right-wing extremists. And they were, what? Us? But we're left. We're Greens. We're the good guys. They call us Nazis now? So, and that actually led to the fact that they, for the very first time, probably questioned, what about all the others that have been named Nazis? Maybe they were Nazis either, and they were just made out to be Nazis, right? The mindset is a different one in the Eastern European countries for a very simple reason. they have lived through totalitarian rule, and it hasn't been that long ago. They remember, they recognize the mechanisms, they recognize how totalitarian regimes go about doing certain things. They recognize the language, they recognize the gaslighting. So it's not really working in the Eastern European countries, and that's where we actually have the most resistance. It's in these countries. And I have been saying that for quite some time. And from what it looks like, unfortunately, I think I will be right. Europe will actually shrink down to a core Europe, and you will find, geographically, you will find it alongside the Eastern European countries. Western Europe, I think it's done with. There is no way of undoing what has been done over the last decades. Just the mentality of the young generation, spoiled brats, not putting any value on things such as freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, and thinking if we censor hate speech or call free speech hate speech, and we can just eliminate all of that, then we will be living in a better world. They do not realize what censorship actually does to a society, and that is like the very first step any totalitarian regime will take in order to, pretty much control every single aspect of a human being's life.
Of course, Germany has these very strong, I guess, anti-Holocaust denial laws. What you told me was that because of these rules, while, of course, you can talk about the Holocaust, what happened, it makes it difficult or potentially legally problematic to talk about the process of the Nazis coming to power. So explain that to me. How could that be?
So in Germany we have, it's, in our penal code, it does carry a jail sentence to deny, to glorify, or to trivialize the Holocaust, right? So, and denial, no problem there. Yeah, you do not deny the Holocaust. You just don't go there, right? Let alone glorify it, all right? But where the problem comes in is trivialization of the Holocaust. But what we're seeing now is trivialization of the Holocaust. It would even be, if I were to point out the incremental steps that were taken by the Nazis back then to turn this highly sophisticated and highly educated and highly civilized society into this hellhole. So pointing that out, and then possibly pointing out the parallels of what we may have seen in the last 3 years, that would be considered trivialization of the Holocaust. And this to me is just staggering. How are we supposed to live up to the promise of never again if we are not allowed to look at what the Nazis precisely did to get where they eventually got us? Nazi Germany did not start out by rounding up people and transporting them off to camps. That was the end point. It started with little, incremental, seemingly inconsequential and insignificant steps. But it was a building, getting people used to a certain idea and then building up on that. And like I said, if we're not allowed to teach the next generations on what these steps were, then it will happen again. Now, who would be interested in people not knowing how it began, how they did it? It would only be the people that are up to doing it again. They would not want anyone to know about it, right? So, but yeah, that is now considered trivialization of the Holocaust. And the argument is actually by pointing out, well, we are not there yet. We are not in that fascist totalitarian regime yet. So that's trivializing the Holocaust, right? No, I'm terribly sorry, I will not go there because it is a process, and no one in their right mind would deny a pregnancy with a stupid argument, the baby isn't born yet, right? We need to understand, how did they do it? How did it work? And when you really look at it, it took the Nazis 5 years, by the way. They came to power in 1933, and it
democratically, I might add.
Democratically elected, absolutely. It took them 5 years until they were capable of pushing legislation, of passing legislation.
Do you think this, you know, I don't know if it's a surge or just, you know, people feeling justified in being like grossly anti-Semitic, calling for from the river to the sea. Do you think that that could somehow again be codified in society?
To be honest, I don't know. I don't know where this is going. But just to think that people would be so nonchalant about this. I really don't understand how young people, especially in the Western democracies, once again, you know, take to the streets and they chant, you know, from the river to the sea. If you were to ask them, what river are we even talking about here? They wouldn't even be able to name the river, right? So it's just this, you know, it's the current thing to do, virtue signaling. Even EU Parliament is not capable of just standing up and saying, no, we will not be apologetic about what Hamas did. They have not found it necessary to finally stop funding the Hamas political system and funding school books, which are full of not only anti-Semitic slurs, but, you know, openly calling for the death of Jews. And the EU is funding these school books, and we haven't stopped. So the hypocrisy, once again, is staggering.
This sort of nonchalant, you mentioned the word nonchalant, right? I mean, I can't help but think back to Matthias Desmet's work, you know, the psychology of totalitarianism, the current thing, the nonchalantness. There's just this, but this
banality of evil, Hannah Arendt.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, because you said they have no idea what river it is. They might not even fully grasp that they're chanting, eliminate the Jews from this entire piece of land and things like that. Yet, you know, the thing that people can't see or find it difficult to see in these circumstances is how does the rhetoric, how does that translate to actual genocidal behavior, right? Yet, I think history is rife with this, right? With that, but you just can't imagine that something like that could happen.
As Heraclitus said, a Greek philosopher, the truth often evades being recognized due to its utter incredibility. That's pretty much what happened in Nazi Germany too. It was so unimaginable, but yet it happened. But even most Jews did not believe what they were about to experience because it was unimaginable. The extent of the atrocities that were afflicted upon them, they couldn't grasp it. So they thought, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But yet it did. Yet it did. So whenever you think that this is so far off, that this is so, you know, don't think it won't happen. Just because you cannot imagine it will happen.
To do that, we have to accept that we as human beings are capable of terrible things.
Yes.
Right? Even we think we're a good person. I would never do that. But history shows us that lots of perfectly normal people, not psychopaths, have done absolutely terrible things.
Every human being is capable of doing the most terrible things to our fellow men and inflicting pain on our fellow men, you know, given the right circumstances. There is a certain criteria have to be met, and it's been proven. And, you know, the Milgram experiment, the Ash, that is just who humans are. So, but unless you're willing to accept the fact that, yes, I am too capable of doing horrible things to my fellow men, unless I'm capable of acknowledging that and embracing that side within myself, I will have no mechanisms to keep it in check. It has to really be a conscious decision not to do it, right? But if you're, it's not going to happen because I'm so pure, I'm so great, you will have nothing to actually keep that dark side in check. So yeah, we needed to revisit who we actually are. There's a good side and there's an evil side. And it is conscious decision we have to take not to let the evil side pretty much prevail and come out.
You know, and I think I did mention this in our previous interview, but I'll mention it again. You know, of course, Solzhenitsyn's famous line, the line between good and evil cuts through every human heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that we have to be aware of that. You mentioned that you don't have a lot of hope for Western Europe, which is a difficult thing probably for, you know, an elected official of a very prominent Western European country to say. So what do you see as the path forward if you don't see a future exactly?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as saying I have no hope for Western Europe, but what I have not seen in the last years, yeah, we do have anti-Semitism by the millions, you know, in Western Europe, not only there. I don't see anyone being willing to really take a hard look at this and possibly say, okay, what do we need to do to undo this, right? So it's not that I don't have hope. I just kind of guess I have come to terms with the fact that we will not be able to undo that. There will always be Europe. It might be a little smaller, right? And my hope also lies actually with the American people, because the American people, they have a much more of a concept of freedom. It's not like that in Europe. You know, we kind of like freedom, but it doesn't have the same significance as it does for the American people. So my hope lies with the Eastern European countries, where we'll have actually a Europe, how we knew it and how I want it anyway, and with the American people. And there was just a couple of nights ago, we had this event going, and it just hit me suddenly. And it was like, gosh, the United States of America, the land of the free, the land of the unlimited possibilities. And I am being asked to come here to speak about freedom to Americans. It really hit me. It was such an honor, you know, that I would be allowed to do that. So, but we need the American people to just, stay American people and, you know, uphold that concept of freedom that is deeply rooted within the Americans. And we need that if we want to save all the peoples around the world from this tyrannical system they're about to impose on us.
Just one final thing as we finish up. You know, you mentioned earlier that people say that all of this stuff actually came from America, this global, the Borg, whatever people will call it, right? Globalist, transhumanist. So that's interesting, or perhaps ironic. If you see the hope for the future, do you see it as having come from America as well?
Well, it depends on setting the stage and gaslighting people and manipulating people. Yeah, that seems to start in the United States. Like I'm talking about safe spaces for, you know, minorities at universities, including that students can no longer or should no longer be exposed to certain topics, even though they are kind of required. So protecting a student overly, that came from the United States, right? So in certain ways, the stage is the
safetiest culture. I think that's what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So
Okay.
in a lot of ways, you know, yeah, the stage is being set. It starts in the United States and then, you know, swaps over the planet. When it comes to flooding societies with illegal immigrants, it seems to be Europe. That's the place, especially Germany, right? So it's depending on what aspect you are focusing on. Something starts here and some things, you know, start there. The thing is this: you do not have to get a society ready for infringement on fundamental rights in China. You don't have to get society ready for taking away freedom in North Korea. But you do have to do that in the United States, in the Western democracies. There is where you have to set the stage. So speaking of framing certain concepts, like fundamental rights are now privileges that a government can grant or withhold depending on how you as a citizen behave, that is a stage that has to be set in the United States. Because the concept of freedom, fundamental rights, is so profound, deeply rooted within all of, the American people. That's where you have to attack it. That's where you have to attack it. And once you get that going, then, it's a walk in the park to get all of the other Western democracies to just fall in line.
Like you said, it looks really dark for Western Europe. What do you think about America?
It actually is not quite accurate to say it's looking very dark for Western Europe. Mm-hmm. It's just, it will be different. Like I said, it may be a little smaller. What do I think will happen to the United States? I truly believe that the American people, they are, like I said, their concept of freedom, their concept of fundamental rights, it is so deeply rooted within all of you. I think the United States will actually be fine. There isn't, I don't see, states dropping out or, none of that. No, I think the American people, they have learned to fight for their freedom. They have learned to defend it, and they have an understanding that it needs defending on an everyday basis. Whereas in Europe, the spoiled brats, the Western Europeans, spoiled brats, it's kind of like, freedom, democracy fell out of the blue sky on one fine day, and boom, there it was. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Our fathers and forefathers, they had to wrestle it from the former elites, and they literally spilled their blood over this. And and now they put no longer any value to these freedom, democracy, all of that. So, but I think the Americans will be fine.
Well, I hope you're right. And Christine Anderson, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Well, thanks for having me. I had a really good time talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining MEP Christine Anderson and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kelek.